This is the Minding Your Own Business podcast, brought to you by Elder Research. Each episode will bring in data and analytics gurus from around the world as they regale us with their data analytics stories and enlighten us with their secrets for how to turn data into actionable insights. Now, here's our host, Evan Wimpy, who will guide us as we dare to mind our own business.
All right, hello, and welcome to the first and inaugural episode of the Minding Your Own Business podcast. I am pleased to introduce our guest today, Gerhard Pilcher. Gerhard is the CEO of Elder Research, which is a data science and analytics consultancy. Gerhard is also the author of the Minding Your Own Business book. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because it's the same name as this podcast. And it is the inspiration behind this podcast. So I am very excited to introduce Gerhard as our first guest. Gerhard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Evan. It's a pleasure to be here. An honor.
All right, fantastic. So we'll jump into the book and sort of how that ties into the podcast and what we hope to learn from the show. But I think maybe as a quick intro, could you give a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to here as the CEO of an analytics consulting firm?
Sure. Yeah, my career has been a little bit circuitous, I would say. I went to NC State, go Wolfpack. Graduated in engineering school in computer science with some engineering background, electrical engineering. And from there, I was in the telecommunications industry for a number of years, building digital switching systems and fiber optic transport systems. Data was just coming on the scene at the time. In fact, we were arguing about what the protocol ought to be to carry data around. And I was arguing for IP, and some of the telecom people were arguing for a more telecom-oriented 64 kilobit packet thing that I said would never support streaming video and things like we're doing today.
A visionary.
Well, it's just maybe a lucky guess, I guess. But I left that. I was the chief technology officer and executive vice president worldwide for a telecom firm at the time, and wasn't spending much time with my family. And so I decided that wasn't really what my mission in life was. So I left a really great job and great bunch of people that I worked with, and bought a road construction company and did road construction, but I couldn't get away from technology. So I bought things like GPS and laser guided grading and computers in the equipment and predictive maintenance to the construction industry. And the construction industry went through a hard time in 2008. I decided to go back to grad school a little bit after that, and analytics and statistics back at NC State again, go Wolfpack again. And from there, I found Elder Research and joined in 2011 to start their practice in the civil federal government. And I've been working here since. About 5 years in, John Elder, our founder, said, "Gosh, Gerhard, I really don't want to be CEO anymore. I want to write and speak. Would you take this job?" And I said, "Sure, I'll take it for a while. I'm looking for that next person to kick me out so that I can continue to consult with our clients, but hope to retire here." And working in this and having been in business for a while, including my own business that was very cost driven, and thinking about analytics and how analytics could really have served me even better than the basic engineering statistics I was doing in my business. I felt like trying to help executives understand that a little bit better and write a book. I was really terrified to write a book to begin with, honestly. I've seen some of the reviews authors have gotten, but I finally realized that I read so much and appreciate that the authors took time to write something down, even though I might not agree. I rarely pick up a book and agree with everything in it, that I ought to at least put some of my thoughts down and offer that to people who are wondering about how to think about analytics and maybe don't have the same technical background that I do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I hope you haven't had to read any of those super critical reviews. I'm sure they're all just jealous. But yeah, for reference, for those of you who don't know, but but the book that Gerhard wrote and that is the inspiration behind this podcast, Minding Your Own Business, I think the subtitle is really informative. It's a primer for executives on understanding and employing data mining and predictive analytics. So you walked us through your background. You were an executive who, hey, perfect. Got my copy here as well. Thanks. So yeah, a very unique background as a business executive. You're right, a circuitous path. Probably not a lot of analytics CEOs from the telecom and then construction world into analytics. But I think that gives a great vantage point that you have here. And so we appreciate that you wrote that book. It's been super helpful. And it's also been roughly 6 years since it was published. And then certainly on the technical side, AI, data science, it moves really fast. Algorithms from 6 years ago are now very old. Is there anything that feels stale in the book now, or anything that you wish that you would want to rewrite or rethink, given that it's now 2022?
Well, there's my most critical review so far. I hadn't done a second edition. And you're right, the industry is changing fast. And so definitely we have been thinking about and begun work on a second edition now. As an aside, I really wanted to do it as an ebook in a Git repository. So once somebody bought it, I could just go in there and make updates and they could download them and get the latest stuff, because the industry is changing. But not only the industry is changing, but I'm a lifelong learner and I'm learning more and learning things that I would like to add. This idea of a repository really for me came from Hadley Wickham, and a guy famous in R. He does similar things with the books he writes. You can just download them from Git and he can update them in real time. I think that's maybe the future of publishing. But I was overruled on this book, and so maybe next book I'll write it that way. But back to your question, I think one of the things that I've already written in draft form to go in a second chapter is aimed at data strategy. And the reason for that is we talk a lot about analytics or machine learning, but the real focus from a business perspective is the information I need to make a better decision in some part of my business, whether it's what's the probability if I make this decision versus that decision of something happening, whether it's because I have a complex set of information based on that, what does it mean? And therefore, what should my next actions, or what are the choices for my next action that I can use my human brain to decide? So use the machine to take out some of the complexity, and then use what the human mind is gifted for at making the connections between that and making a decision to go forward. But no matter what we're doing, we're really trying to get at more nuanced understanding of forces acting on the business, reduce that business somehow, or intelligently automate some process in that. Analytics is just one step in the process to achieve those outcomes. And business leaders don't typically think about analytics. They think about what's happening in my business and how do I solve for that. And so I think maybe a little bit more around that in the second edition would be helpful, not only for the business leaders, but for the analytic leaders they're hiring to think about in a different way, to understand more how those executives are thinking, and to think more about how to communicate with them and break down the business problems they're putting forward into steps that have to happen analytically, so they can have a better perspective on, hey, it's not going to happen tomorrow because we might need to collect data first, and then we might need to run a model. Then we might need to figure out how to deliver that for somebody to consume it into a delivery process.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah, and I think your first book's certainly geared towards the executive and understanding what analytics can do. But ultimately, the goal is to bridge that gap between those executives and those analytics practitioners. So at the analytic manager, analytic leader level, sort of a guide to how they can bridge that gap. I think that's super useful. They'd probably also be more inclined to update, to Git pull the updated version of the book, somebody with some analytic prowess. So maybe there's your opportunity for the book repository.
Yeah, man, thanks.
All right. So you've got the executive, you've got an analytics leader, you've consulted across a lot of different industries. Given that you've got a good use case, if you've got something that you're excited about and you think will work and is a good place to employ analytics, you still got a lot of work to do to get it off the ground. Can you talk about what some of those challenges are, or maybe what is typically the hardest challenge, maybe that people don't think about? It's not just building the model, it's not just tuning some model, but actually getting a model, a predictive model off the ground. Sort of what challenges do you see there?
Yeah, sure. I always hesitate to say this because we're an analytic company, but the analytics is sort of the easy part, the data science. The biggest challenges I've faced are the beginning and the end of the process. And what do I mean by that? The beginning of the process is really how we define the business problem and how we define it with enough clarity. And do we understand the value of solving that problem and how to break that down into the information or data that we need to solve it and how we might deliver that, thinking about that from the beginning of the process. And typically that kind of information has to come from an executive or somebody fairly high up in the organization to make that connection between the value of what we're doing and the value to the business. But I find it's absolutely critical. If you don't do that well, you may be fighting the wrong problem. I find executives get frustrated with it, one, because their time is short, two, because they think really fast a lot of times and are frustrated when people don't think at the same speed that they do. But thirdly, they get frustrated because they feel like you haven't started, like you're not
Sure.
doing something, and so therefore you're not making progress. But I've always found through all of my experience that if you take the time up front to get that part right, whether it's specifications or understanding that business problem, then at the end of the day, you'll directionally be in the right place, and it'll be a lot faster and a lot less costly than having to make course corrections toward the end and more expensive part of the process. And it's not that in analytics, this is another thing that's a little bit different in mindset, is that analytics is really a series of experiments to better understand the information and to see if it has a signal that you're hoping for, the inference that you want or the clarity that you hope to achieve. And you have to test that to make sure that it does. But you're experimenting, and as you're experimenting, you want to directionally understand where you're going, but you also might need to pivot and make adjustments to that. So this first part of the process is usually really hard. And I've got some examples where it was done well and the project went super well. And I've got some examples where it wasn't done well and the project didn't go as well. And so I find, statistically speaking, it's pretty well correlated that if you really take the time on the front end of the process, you get a better outcome. The other part that's really difficult, and you have to think about it up front too, is where am I delivering this information? If you think about the whole purpose of analytics is we're trying to take some information, data we have, combine it with other data and gather some insight, but the insight isn't what's important. It's how that insight drives some decision that we're going to make better. Maybe we automate that decision, or maybe we feed that into a higher level strategic decision that could be millions of dollars to a company. And so thinking about that delivery mechanism or that consumption of that to drive a decision, most all businesses are run around a set of processes or systems, which are processes and skill sets. And so if you're adding some new piece of information, thinking about how that's going to be consumed in that process, and even if that process can actually absorb that new piece of information, if it can actually make that decision, that system is capable of it ahead of time, so you can begin that planning, you can begin that communication, you can begin to modify those systems that are going to need to change to consume that information ahead of time. But most companies don't want to invest in that. And it's amazing to me because over the years, you can look at bigger companies and all these systems that they buy. They think that software or technology somehow is the answer, but software is just the tool. It's really how you apply that tool within the business that matters. And yet we seem to forget that lesson every time a tool is purchased. Millions of dollars might be spent. It's put into place, and there's not follow-up training or changes in process, and the tool just sits on the shelf or gets utilized maybe a tenth of the actual capability that you purchased. And it seems such a waste that we don't think about that more often and up front. We just continue to believe that that tool is that easy button, sort of technology is the cocaine of business people. Give me more technology and all my problems will go away. But it's never really the case in my experience. But this is the second hard part. And I tell people it's really the long pole in the tent. And if you're not willing to invest in it, then it's going to be very tough. I just recently, with one of our really great clients, and their acting chief data officer, but I told them this several years ago about a product they were buying, a technology they were buying. I said, well, we need to understand the current process and then how that's going to change, what the new process looks like, what skill sets. And no, we're just going to buy the software. And the software was purchased, and it's good, and it's provided some value. But now they're realizing, hey, if we don't really dig in and change processes around how this software is going to be used, then we're not getting the full value out of it. So now we're going to an exercise, fast forward, that wisdom maybe would have been helpful to put in place in the very beginning. But, everybody has to, at some point, internalize some of these concepts for themselves and see them in action for it to matter to them. But that's why it's hard. Some people just haven't been through that and seen what success could look like by spending that effort and time up front.
Yeah, certainly a hard lesson to learn. And it's easy to see the siren or hear the siren's call. Do you see the siren? You hear the siren call of the problem-solving technology. All we have to do is buy this, and then boom, we can implement this solution. That's really, really good points, Gerhard. And I'm curious, you mentioned putting the time and effort at the front end to really understand the business and the problem that you're trying to approach here. You mentioned pulling an executive in who can really help drive the type of decision you're trying to make. You've seen successes and you've seen failures aside from time spent on the front end of an analytics project. Are there any commonalities there in that you've seen in the successful projects? Certain questions that they ask or certain things that they tend to focus more on?
It's really different for every business, and sometimes within the business for every team within that business. Where I have seen the most clear success is when the team is willing to have their norms challenged. Because a lot of times data is revealing something not intuitive to our experience. And that's an interesting find. That's one of our most interesting aha moments, or we call it, oh, wow. What? And so exploring why that is and why it's counterintuitive to us sometimes leads to some of the biggest breakthroughs. But I find that sometimes the people who aren't willing to be challenged on that can sometimes miss a great insight and opportunity there. So yeah, it's that's probably the next biggest thing to success is willing to be challenged.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and probably true in more than just analytics as well. If you're looking to make change, you've got to be willing to make change. And so I think you've given some really good guidelines here. This, again, is the first episode of this Minding Your Own Business podcast, assuming they don't pull the plug after this one. We'll have more episodes, and we will talk to some analytics leaders and some executives that have done just this and have tried to get some analytics initiatives implemented off the ground and driving some real business change. And as we talk to them in the coming weeks and months, is there anything in particular that you would want to glean from them, what their secrets are, what their lessons learned are?
Yeah, I think there are probably three areas I'd be really curious about. One of them is their successes and failures in driving adoption, um, and doing the change planning, what we call change planning early. In the history of our company, we initially just delivered an equation, which was the model, right? That's all a model is. It's an equation that creates another piece of data. At the end of the day, even the more complex one is just pages of equations instead of a single equation, but essentially an equation. And then we realized that wasn't really effective, and so we started building software systems to help deliver that, to help somebody consume that in a way that was intuitive for them, not from a quantitative point of view, but intuitive to the way they did their work. And that really helped us and got us to another level of adoption. And then finally, we realized that without some change playbooks, without some approaches to how change should happen, especially around new information and decision processes, we couldn't be successful. So we built that third leg onto our school, on our virtual stool for elder research, along with the training platform that allows us to do the data literacy and training necessary to support change. So I would be interested in, these leaders, what they've experienced in change and some of the secret sauce or some of the things that have helped them drive change and convince people of the need for this change and investment in that early, so that you can get the most value from your analytics. That would be one. Second would be, as they've experienced this and gone through this, why have leaders been resistant to it? What is it that we're failing to learn or failing to communicate that leaders continue to resist investing in the change? And finally, what they've learned about transforming organizations into ones that continuously reinvent themselves, right? At Elder, we have that as part of our serve model, reinvent continuously, and we're constantly on a quarterly basis looking at the things that we can do to improve. But I'm curious about how leaders are helping other companies do that. One of the interesting things about being an interim CDO is a friend of mine, Dr. Peter Aiken, wrote a book on data strategy, and he says, most CDOs, the first CDO of a company are usually fired because they have to push really hard against the organization, and they don't make a lot of friends initially. So he said sometimes it's better to have a consultant be the CDO because they're easier to fire and they can lay the groundwork for the next CDO to come in and have success. So yeah, all of that, what I just was talking about, is sort of wrapped up in the reason that it's difficult for CDOs, I think.
Yeah, certainly a lot of inertia carrying an organization in one way. And if you're trying to make changes, if you're trying to continuously reinvent, the inertia is not always with you there. I'm curious, are you as interim CDO, are you the initial CDO, or are you replacing a previous CDO?
I'm the initial CDO, so I'm in line to be fired here.
All right. Don't take it personally. You were hired to be fired.
Yeah, I'm pushing hard.
That's really exciting. Okay, we're going to wrap up here shortly, Gerhard. I want to ask you one more thing, and I do think it's worth pointing out. It's fun. We've talked about analytics and how the challenges people have and how we try to overcome those, and we've had a completely non-technical discussion. There are very few things that are technical focused. The real driving challenges, sort of the change management, having norms challenge. Making organizational changes. So I'm curious if you or a consultant that works with you at Elder Research, if they've got something, if they got a business use case, and they can press the magic button, and all of the stakeholders from the executive down to the practicing data scientists and data engineers, they're aligned. They've got the same vision. They've got buy-in. They're ready to execute. So you don't really have those change management issues. Like everybody is on board, ready to go. Do you have anything that's like, this is what I would want to tackle, but maybe it's too much in the real world, but with the magic button push, then yeah, let's use analytics on this one.
I'd love to have that magic button.
We're looking for it.
in general, I think, it's what I mentioned earlier. I would like to shift the conversation to information away from analytics. Analytics is a very amorphous term and means different things to different people. But I think if we talked about specifically about business and information that people need to make better decisions, what should my next action be? If I only knew this, I could do that, and so really change the conversation in that way, with analytics just being a tool to help derive that piece of information that they need in general. But if you want to get more specific, and this may be my retirement, I don't know, it may happen before, right? If I could really had a project like that, I would love to apply analytics and better information to education, especially K through 3. I think if I look around the world and look at how the world has been transformed over the last 50 years or even 100 years, education really hasn't been transformed at all. It's really where it was. And I think especially in younger children, K through 3 especially is what sets the precedent for whether a child, if they develop the math and reading skills at those ages, then they are much more likely, significantly more likely to graduate from high school and succeed in our society. And so focusing in on delivering those skills outside of what I consider artificial grade levels. I think grade levels are bad for a lot of reasons. One, for really smart students, they tend to slow them down in the areas that they're gifted in. Like for me, I would have accelerated in math and I would have been slow in English. Why artificially put a grade around that forces me into just so much skill level? I could have used more in the language skills and or more time in the language skills, and I could have advanced faster in math. Others would be just the opposite. And on the opposite side of it, slower kids today in education are passed to a new grade level without the requisite skill. So why not think about education K through 3 more like little pods of skill development, and look at it almost like a gig economy, matching students with teachers, letting them stay until they've mastered that skill. Another analogy might be martial arts, where you stay at a yellow belt or a white belt until you achieve a certain skill level. Then you're a yellow belt and you stay there till you achieve a certain skill level. But nobody fails. Everybody just moves along a continuum at their own pace, so that we ensure that kids, at least by the 3rd grade, have the requisite math and language skills that they can succeed later in their education, rather than just passing them along in that way. And I just think we just need to reimagine education, and we can learn from children and help them discover where their gifting is, and therefore better match them to teachers and skill development, so that their success is ensured rather than uncertain as it is today. And information can play a huge role in making that dream come true. So I'm gathering people now, and it's something I'm thinking about. I don't know if we'll be able to do it within Elder Research, but I'm certainly going to try to pursue it in my retirement one day if I retire. That's another question. But I'm gathering teachers and other interested data scientists right now, and people who would experience in these things. But you can see that getting alignment across all the stakeholders and something like that is going to be a huge problem or challenge, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sorry, there's certainly no easy button on that one. We talk about some stakeholder inertia. There's a lot behind education. I think it's fitting, Gerhard, you say, if I ever retire, I'm going to go try to solve one of the world's hardest problems instead. Nice, easy retirement. Kick the feet back. A very good answer, a very noble answer, and I think certainly highlights how important the stakeholder buy-in and the stakeholder alignment is.
Yep, certainly does. Thank you for your time today, Evan. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Gerhard, we've been very pleased to have you on the show, our first ever show. Folks can see Gerhard and the work that he and his team do at Elder Research. Gerhard, appreciate your time today. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. Take care.